My father abandoned me at a bus terminal. 20 years later, he begged me to save him. Most people remember the first time they felt safe. I remember the first time I realized I wasn't. It was a Thursday evening, just past sunset, when the sky looked like it couldn't decide whether to stay or disappear. My father pulled the car into a crowded bus terminal on the edge of a city I didn't recognize. The kind of place where people don't look at each other for too long, where everyone seems like they're either leaving something behind or running from it. I was 9 years old. "Get out," he said, like he was asking me to grab groceries. Welcome to a new story. Today's story is about those who left you years ago. If you are new to my channel, just subscribe, like the video and drop a comment about this story. I didn't argue. I didn't even think so. When your whole life has been built around following instructions, you don't suddenly grow questions. You just move. So I stepped out. The door shut behind me with a dull, final sound that didn't feel important at the time, but I would remember it for the rest of my life. I leaned back down toward the window. What am I doing here? My father didn't look at me right away. He adjusted the rearview mirror, checked something on his phone, then finally met my eyes. Not with anger, not even with disappointment. With curiosity. "Let's see if you can figure things out on your own," he said. "It's time you learn." I thought he was joking. He wasn't a warm man, but he wasn't cruel either. Not in ways that left marks you could point to. His punishments were always lessons. Silent treatments. Locked doors. Long lectures about how the world didn't care about weak people. Still, this felt different. "How long?" I asked. He shrugged. "Long enough." And then he drove away. No hesitation. No second glance. Just gone. At first, I stayed exactly where I was. Because kids believe in return. We believe that if someone leaves, they'll come back. That there's always a reason, always an explanation waiting just around the corner. So I stood there, backpack hanging loosely from one shoulder, watching every car that passed like it might be his. 10 minutes passed. Then 30. Then an hour. The crowd changed around me. Faces came and went. The noise shifted from busy to tired. The sun disappeared completely, leaving behind flickering fluorescent lights that made everything look colder than it was. That's when the first crack appeared. Not fear, something quieter. Doubt. What if he wasn't coming back? I tried to think like he would. He always said the world rewarded people who could adapt. So I watched. I listened. I noticed which buses had long lines and which didn't. I noticed which drivers looked kind and which ones didn't look at anyone at all. I noticed that no one noticed me. That part hurt more than anything. You think being left behind is the worst part. It isn't. It's realizing that the world keeps moving like you were never there. I didn't cry. Not because I was brave, but because I was trained not to. Crying never solved anything at home. It only made things worse. So instead, I did what I always did. I stayed quiet. I waited. And when waiting stopped making sense, I moved. There was a bench near the far end of the terminal, half broken and barely under a working light. I sat there, pulling my backpack onto my lap like it contained something important. It didn't. It was empty. Just like the instructions I'd been given. Just like the plan I was supposed to follow. "Hey." The voice startled me. I looked up to see an older man standing a few feet away. Not old enough to be fragile, but old enough to move slower than everyone else. He wore a worn-out jacket and carried a plastic bag filled with things that didn't look like they belonged together. "You lost?" he asked. I shook my head. He studied me for a moment, then sat down at the other end of the bench without asking. "That's funny," he said. "You look like someone who is." I didn't answer. He didn't push. People who have nothing tend to understand silence better than anyone. We sat like that for a while. Cars came and went. A bus engine roared to life somewhere behind us. Someone laughed too loudly in the distance. The night kept stretching. "You got someone coming back for you?" he asked eventually. I hesitated. Then I said the only thing I still wanted to believe. "Yeah." He nodded slowly, like he didn't believe me, but respected the answer anyway. "All right," he said. "Then we wait." That was the moment everything changed. Not because I was saved, but because someone chose to stay. Hours passed. At some point, he handed me a bottle of water without saying anything. Later, half a sandwich wrapped in paper. I took both without asking why. Because hunger doesn't care about pride. And kindness, when you're not used to it, feels suspicious, but necessary. "Name?" he asked after a while. I told him. He nodded. "I'm Kareem. No last name. Just Kareem." Like the rest didn't matter. Around midnight, the terminal began to empty. The noise softened into something hollow. Even the lights seemed dimmer, like they were getting tired too. "Are you sure someone's coming?" he asked again. This time, I didn't answer right away. Because something inside me had already shifted. Not broken. Just adjusted. Like a door quietly closing. "No," I said finally. It was the first honest thing I'd said all night. Kareem didn't react the way I expected. No shock. No pity. Just a small nod. "All right," he said. Then we stopped waiting. That sentence didn't feel big at the time. But it was. Because it was the moment I stopped being the kid who was left behind, and became the kid who kept going. "Come on," he said, standing up slowly. "It's not safe to stay here all night." I hesitated. Every warning I'd ever been taught about strangers echoed in my head. But none of those warnings had prepared me for the people who were supposed to protect me walking away. So I made a choice. Not based on trust, but on survival. I stood up and followed him. As we walked away from the terminal, I glanced back one last time. Just in case. Just in case a car would pull in. Just in case my father would step out and say this was all a test, that I'd passed, that everything was fine. Nothing happened. The entrance stayed empty. The road stayed quiet. And whatever version of my life included going back, ended right there. I didn't know it then, but that night didn't just change where I lived. It changed who I became. Because being abandoned doesn't destroy you. Not always. Sometimes. It removes everything that was holding you in place. And 20 years later, when my phone started ringing with a number I hadn't seen in decades, I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel pain. I felt something much colder. Something sharper. I felt ready. Kareem didn't take me far that night, but it felt like crossing into another world. We walked through narrow streets where the lights flickered and the noise of the terminal faded into something distant and irrelevant. The city didn't feel as loud anymore, it felt closer, more real, like I was finally inside it instead of standing forgotten on the edges. He led me to a small, worn-down apartment building that looked like it had been standing long before anyone cared to remember it. The stairs creaked under our weight as we climbed, and I remember thinking that every sound mattered now, every step meant something. Inside, the apartment was simple. One room, a small kitchen corner, and a mattress on the floor. It wasn't much, but it was warm. And after a night like that, warmth felt like safety. Kareem didn't ask too many questions. That was the first thing I noticed. He didn't push me to explain where I came from or why I had been left behind. He just gave me a blanket, pointed to the mattress, and said, "Sleep. Tomorrow, we will figure things out." It was the first time someone had offered help without asking for anything in return. I didn't trust it, but I accepted it. The next morning didn't feel like a fresh start. It felt like a test I hadn't prepared for. I woke up expecting confusion, panic, maybe even regret. But instead, there was something else, clarity. There was no one coming to get me. No explanation waiting. No second chance at the life I had before. That part was over. Kareem was already awake, sitting by the window with a cup of tea that had long gone cold. "You can't stay stuck in yesterday," he said without turning around. "People who survive move forward, even when they don't know where forward leads." I didn't respond, but I listened. Because unlike my father's lessons, this didn't feel like control. It felt like the truth. Days turned into weeks, and somehow, without ever officially deciding it, I stayed. Kareem found small jobs, fixing things, carrying loads, doing whatever people needed. He wasn't rich, not even close, but he knew how to survive. And more importantly, he knew how to teach survival without breaking someone in the process. He taught me things no school ever could. How to read people by the way they talk, not just what they say. How to spot danger before it arrives. How to make decisions when there are no good options, only better ones. And slowly, without ever saying it out loud, he taught me something I had never experienced before. Stability. It didn't come all at once. It came in small, quiet moments. A shared meal at the end of a long day. A nod of approval when I figured something out on my own. The way he always made sure there was just enough for both of us, even when there clearly wasn't. For the first time in my life, I wasn't being tested. I was being built. Years passed, and the boy who sat on that bench at the terminal started to disappear. In his place was someone sharper, more aware, someone who didn't wait for things to happen but made them happen. I worked. I learned. I adapted. School came later, through night classes and second chances, but by then I understood something most people didn't learn until much later in life: education isn't just what you're taught, it's what you're willing to chase. Kareem never called himself family. But he was. Not in the way people say it out loud, with labels and expectations. In the quieter way. The real way. The kind that shows up, stays, and never makes you feel like you have to earn your place. When I turned 18, I got my first real opportunity. A small logistics company needed someone who understood the streets, someone who could think fast and solve problems without making noise. I didn't have a resume that mattered, but I had something better: I knew how to survive pressure. I took the job. And I didn't just do it well, I understood it. Routes, timing, people, risk. It all made sense to me in a way it didn't for others. Within a few years, I wasn't just working for the company, I was running operations they didn't even realize needed managing. Quietly, efficiently, without asking for recognition. Because I had learned something important early on. Power isn't loud. It builds in silence. By the time I was 25, I wasn't just stable, I was successful. Not in a flashy, obvious way, but in a controlled, undeniable one. I had money, connections, and something even more valuable: independence. No one could leave me behind anymore, because I was never standing still long enough for that to happen. Kareem watched it all without interfering. He never tried to take credit, never tried to guide my decisions once I could make them on my own. But sometimes, I'd catch him looking at me with a quiet kind of pride he'd never admit out loud. "You did all right," he said once. It was the closest thing to praise I ever got from him. And it meant more than anything my father had ever said. But even as life moved forward, there was always one thing I never did. I never went back. Not to the house I grew up in. Not to the street. Not even to the city. It wasn't fear, it was a choice. Some doors don't need closure. Some stories don't need revisiting. Or at least, that's what I believed. Until one evening, 20 years after that night at the terminal, everything shifted again. I was in my office, reviewing reports, when my phone buzzed on the desk beside me. It was a number I didn't recognize. Normally, I would have ignored it. Unknown numbers rarely brought anything useful. But something made me pause. Not instinct. Not curiosity. Something deeper. Something familiar. I picked up the phone. Hello. There was silence on the other end at first. Not the kind caused by bad connection, the kind filled with hesitation. The kind that carries history. Then a voice spoke. Older. Slower. But unmistakable. It's me. I didn't need him to say his name. After 20 years, I still recognized my father's voice. And in that moment, everything Kareem had built in me, the control, the discipline, the distance, held steady. Because I didn't feel like an abandoned kid anymore. I felt like the man he had created by leaving. And for the first time, the roles had changed. I didn't say anything right away. Not because I was shocked, but because I wasn't. For years, I had imagined this moment in different ways. Sometimes he came back apologizing. Sometimes he came back pretending nothing had happened. And sometimes, he never came back at all. Out of all the possibilities, this one felt the least dramatic. Just a voice on the other end of a phone. Older. Weaker. But still his. I figured you wouldn't hang up, he said after a few seconds, trying to sound steady, like he still had control over the conversation. I leaned back in my chair, letting the silence stretch just enough to make him feel it. You figured wrong about a lot of things, I replied calmly. There was a pause. Not long, but long enough. I deserve that, he said. That almost made me smile. Not because it was sincere, but because it was predictable. Regret is easy when time has already taken everything from you. It doesn't cost anything anymore. What do you want? I asked. No anger. No raised voice. Just a question. Because that's all he was to me now, a question that no longer mattered. He exhaled slowly, like even that took effort. I need to see you. Straight to it. No story. No explanation. No apology. Just need. That told me everything. I'm busy, I said, glancing at the reports on my desk, though I wasn't reading them anymore. This isn't something I can say over the phone. Then maybe it doesn't need to be said. Another silence. He wasn't used to this version of me. The one who didn't react. The one who didn't chase answers. The one who didn't need him. I'm not asking for much, he said, his voice tightening slightly. Just one conversation. That word, asking, felt out of place coming from him. He never asked. He decided. He instructed. He left. And now he was asking. I let that sit between us for a moment before responding. Where are you? I asked. The relief in his breath was subtle, but I caught it. Still predictable. The address he gave me wasn't what I expected. It wasn't the house I grew up in. It wasn't even in the same part of the city. It was smaller. Older. The kind of place people end up in when life stops expanding and starts shrinking. I didn't go that day. Or the next. Not because I was avoiding him. But because I understood something he didn't. Time was no longer his to control. If he wanted this meeting, he would wait. Just like I had. 3 days later, I stood outside the building. It looked tired. Not broken, not abandoned, but worn in a way that couldn't be fixed with paint or repairs. The kind of place that held more history than hope. For a moment, I just stood there. Not thinking about him. Not thinking about the past. Just observing. Because I had learned something important over the years. Before you step into a situation, understand it. When I finally walked in, the hallway smelled faintly of dust and something older, something settled. My footsteps echoed slightly against the floor, each one measured, controlled. Room 12. I knocked once. No answer. I knocked again. This time, I heard movement. Slow. Careful. The door opened halfway. And there he was. Time had done its job. The man standing in front of me wasn't the one I remembered. His posture had softened, his face lined with years that hadn't been kind. His eyes, though, they were the same. Observing. Measuring. But now, there was something else behind them. Something unfamiliar. Uncertainty. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Because what do you say to someone who erased you from their life, and is now standing in front of you like nothing can undo that? You've changed, he said finally. It wasn't a compliment. It was an observation. So have you, I replied. He stepped aside slightly, opening the door wider. Come in. I didn't move immediately. Not out of hesitation, but choice. Then, without a word, I walked past him into the apartment. It was small. Smaller than the one Kareem had taken me to all those years ago. That didn't escape me. The furniture was minimal. A table, 2 chairs, a couch that had clearly seen better days. There were no photos on the walls. No signs of a life built or shared. Just existence. You live here alone? I asked, already knowing the answer. Yes. Of course he did. We sat across from each other at the table. The distance between us wasn't large, but it felt deliberate. Like neither of us was willing to close it. For a moment, he just looked at me. Not like a father. Like someone trying to understand a stranger who somehow felt familiar. I didn't think you'd actually come, he admitted. I almost didn't, I said. Honesty, for once, didn't feel like weakness. He nodded slowly, absorbing that. Then, after a long pause, he said the words that most people would have started with. I'm sorry. And there it was. The apology. Late. Simple. Almost, small. I didn't react. Not because it didn't matter, but because I had spent years understanding something most people don't. An apology doesn't rebuild what someone chose to destroy. It just acknowledges it. For what? I asked calmly. He frowned slightly, like the question caught him off guard. For what I did. For leaving you. That's vague, I said. His jaw tightened. Good. Let him work for it. I thought it would make you stronger, he said after a moment. The world isn't kind. I wanted you to learn that early. I leaned back slightly, studying him. That wasn't a regret. That was justification. And that told me everything I needed to know. You didn't teach me anything, I said evenly. His eyes flickered. I survived, I continued. That's different. Silence filled the room again, heavier this time. Because now we weren't revisiting the past. We were redefining it. I didn't come here for forgiveness, he said finally, his voice lower now. I came because I need your help. There it was. The real reason. It always is. I didn't ask what kind of help. Not yet. Because I already knew something more important. For 20 years, he had the power. Now, he didn't. And as I sat there, looking at the man who once left me with nothing, I realized something that settled deeper than anger ever could. This wasn't about revenge anymore. Not in the way most people think. There would be no shouting. No dramatic confrontation. No moment of explosive justice. This would be quieter. Smarter. More complete. Because the greatest lesson I ever learned was the one he never intended to teach me. And now, it was finally his turn to learn. I didn't respond to his request right away. Not because I didn't hear him, but because I wanted him to sit in it. That word. Help. It sounded unfamiliar in his mouth, like something he hadn't practiced enough to say naturally. For a man who built his entire life on control, needing someone, needing me, wasn't just uncomfortable. It was humiliating. What kind of help? I asked finally, my tone steady, almost indifferent. He looked down at his hands for a moment, as if organizing the truth into something easier to deliver. But the truth doesn't get easier with time. It just gets delayed. I made some mistakes, he said. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was incomplete. A sentence like that tries to shrink years of consequences into something manageable. Something forgivable. What kind of mistakes? I repeated. He hesitated again, and this time, I noticed something new. Not pride. Fear. There was a business, he began slowly. After you left, I got into logistics. Transport contracts, small at first. Then bigger ones. I thought I understood how things worked. That caught my attention, but I didn't show it. Because I understood that world too well. Maybe better than he ever did. And? I asked. And I trusted the wrong people. Of course he did. Men like him always think they're the smartest in the room, until they aren't. There's debt, he continued, his voice tightening. Not the kind you can ignore. Not the kind you can negotiate away with time. I leaned forward slightly, resting my arms on the table. How much? He didn't answer immediately. Which meant it was bad. Enough, he said finally. That's not a number. He exhaled sharply, like the weight of it physically hurt to say. 700,000. Silence followed. Not because I was shocked, but because I was calculating. 700,000 wasn't just debt. It collapsed. It meant bad deals, worse partners, and decisions made under pressure. It meant desperation had already set in, and when desperation shows up, people stop thinking clearly. Or worse, they start thinking like him. And these people? I asked. Are they patient? His expression answered before he spoke. No, of course not. Debt like that doesn't come with reminders. It comes with deadlines. And you thought of me, I said, not as a question, but as a conclusion. He met my eyes this time, and for the first time since I walked in, there was no defense in his expression. Just honesty. You're the only one who can help. That sentence hung in the air longer than anything else he had said. Not because it was emotional. But because it was true. I leaned back again, letting the chair settle beneath me, my gaze never leaving his. Do you know what's interesting? I said calmly. He didn't answer. You spent years teaching me that the world doesn't care about weakness. That people who can't stand on their own don't deserve to be saved. His jaw tightened slightly. I continued. And now here you are, asking me to do exactly what you taught me never to expect from anyone. He didn't interrupt. Because there was nothing to argue with. I'm not asking you to save me, he said carefully. I'm asking for a chance to fix what I can. I tilted my head slightly, studying him. And what exactly can you fix? That question hit harder than anything else. Because deep down, he already knew the answer. Nothing, I said before he could respond. Not the past. Not what you did. Not the years that followed. The room felt smaller now, heavier. Not with anger. With truth. But this isn't about fixing things, is it? I continued. This is about survival. He didn't deny it. Because he couldn't. I stood up slowly, walking toward the window. Outside, the city moved like it always did, unaware, unaffected. People go places, solve problems, and build lives. The same world he once threw me into. You left me with nothing, I said, my back still turned to him. No plan. No support. No guarantee I'd even make it through the night. I paused, letting that settle. And I did. I turned back to face him. And now you're asking me to step in and fix a situation you created. There was a long silence. Then, quietly, he said, yes. No excuses. No justification. Just the truth. And for a moment, I respected that. Not enough to forgive him. But enough to consider what came next. I walked back to the table and sat down again, my movements slow, deliberate. Control wasn't something I had to force anymore, it was something I carried naturally. You're right about one thing, I said. His eyes lifted slightly. I can help you. Hope is a dangerous thing. I saw it appear in his expression before he could hide it. That small shift. That quiet relief. But I won't do it the way you think, I continued. The hope didn't disappear. But it changed. If I get involved, I said, I will take control. Completely. His brow furrowed slightly. What does that mean? It means your debt becomes my problem, I explained. Your business, what's left of it, becomes mine. Your decisions stop being yours. He stared at me, trying to process it. This isn't a loan, I added. It's a takeover. The word landed exactly how I intended it to. Heavy. Final. You're asking me to give up everything, he said slowly. I held his gaze. You already lost everything, I replied. That was the truth he didn't want to say out loud. And if I say no, he asked. I didn't hesitate. Then you walk out of this the same way I did. That hit. Because now he understood. Not just the situation, but the mirror. I wasn't raising my voice. I wasn't threatening him. I was offering him the same lesson he once gave me. Just, without pretending it was for his benefit. He looked down again, his hands tightening slightly. This wasn't about pride anymore. This was about survival. Why would you help me at all? He asked quietly. That question mattered. Because the answer wasn't simple. I leaned forward slightly, my voice calm, controlled. Because I believe in something you never did. He looked up. Consequences, I said. Another silence filled the room. But this one felt different. More final. More defined. I'm not doing this to save you, I continued. I'm doing this so you understand exactly what your choices cost. And in that moment, the balance fully shifted. Because 20 years ago, he walked away thinking he was teaching me how the world works. Now, I was about to show him. He didn't answer me right away. Not because he didn't understand the offer, but because he understood it perfectly. For the first time in his life, he wasn't the one setting the terms. There was no angle to work, no authority to lean on, no hidden control he could fall back on. Just a choice. A simple, brutal choice. Accept, or lose everything. I watched him sit there, weighing what little he had left against what I was offering to take. Pride flickered across his face more than once, rising like it wanted to speak, then disappearing just as quickly when reality caught up. Finally, he exhaled slowly. All right, he said. One word. Heavy. Final. And just like that, the man who once decided my future without hesitation had handed his own over to me. The process started the next morning. I don't do things emotionally. I do them efficiently. Within hours, I had my legal team reviewing everything tied to his name, contracts, debts, assets, liabilities. And just as I expected, the situation was worse than he had described. The 700,000 wasn't even the full picture. There were penalties, hidden clauses, and agreements that reeked of desperation. He hadn't just made bad decisions. He had made reckless ones. I stepped into his world the same way I had stepped into my own years ago, quietly, observantly, without announcing anything. The people he owed weren't the kind you negotiate with using words alone. They respected leverage, structure, and above all, certainty. So I gave them that. I didn't beg. I didn't argue. I restructured. Meetings were short. Direct. Controlled. I replaced uncertainty with contracts they couldn't ignore. I absorbed the highest risk portions of his debt under my own network, redirected operations into channels I already controlled, and cut out every weak link he had surrounded himself with. Within 2 weeks, the chaos was gone. Within a month, the threat disappeared. And through all of it, he watched. I didn't involve him. Not in the decisions. Not in the strategy. Not even in the conversations that determined whether he kept anything at all. He sat in the background of his own life, witnessing what it looked like when control was real, not forced. Not loud. Earned. One evening, after everything had been stabilized, I asked him to meet me at the office. He arrived early. Of course he did. People who lose power learn quickly how to wait. When I walked in, he was standing near the window, looking out over the city. The same kind of view I used to imagine when I was a kid, before I learned that views don't matter if you don't have control over where you stand. "It's done," I said, setting a folder on the table. He turned slowly. "What does that mean?" "It means you're not in danger anymore," I replied. "No one's coming for you. No one's waiting for payments you can't make." Relief hit him instantly. Real relief. The kind that loosens your shoulders before you even realize it. "And the business?" he asked carefully. I slid the folder toward him. "It's mine," I said. He opened it slowly, reading through documents he barely understood anymore. Ownership transfers. Operational control. Asset redistribution. Everything. Signed. Finalized. "You weren't exaggerating," he said quietly. "No," I replied. "I wasn't." He closed the folder and placed his hand on top of it, as if trying to hold on to something that was already gone. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Because there wasn't much left to say. "So what happens to me?" he asked eventually. That question lingered longer than any of the others. Not because I didn't have an answer, but because I wanted him to feel it before I gave it. "You start over," I said. He frowned slightly. "At my age?" I held his gaze. "You said it yourself once," I replied. "The world doesn't care." That landed exactly where it needed to. Not as revenge. As truth. "I'm not leaving you with nothing," I added after a moment. "There's a small account set up. Enough for a place like this. Basic living. No risk. No debt." He looked at me, confused. "That's it?" he asked. I nodded. "That's it." He stared at me for a long time, searching for something behind my words. Anger. Bitterness. Payback. But there was none. That's what unsettled him the most. "You could have done worse," he said quietly. "I could have," I agreed. Another silence filled the room. But this one felt different. Complete. "Why didn't you?" he asked. I leaned back slightly, my voice calm, steady, the same way he used to be when he thought he was teaching me something important. "Because I'm not you." That was it. No speech. No dramatic ending. Just the truth. He nodded slowly, like he understood something too late to change it. And in that moment, I realized something I hadn't expected. I didn't hate him. Not anymore. Hate requires something to hold on to. And I had let go a long time ago. As he stood to leave, he paused at the door. I thought leaving you would make you stronger, he said, his voice quieter than I had ever heard it. I didn't look at him this time. It did, I replied. He waited, like there was more. There wasn't. So he left. Just like he did 20 years ago. Only this time, I didn't watch him go. Later that night, I found myself driving without a destination. Not out of habit. Out of memory. Without thinking, I ended up near the old terminal. It looked smaller than I remembered. Less important. Like time had stripped it of whatever power it once held over me. I stepped out of the car and stood there for a moment, the night air quieter than it used to feel. The lights still flickered. The benches were still worn. But it wasn't the same place. Because I wasn't the same person. I walked over to the far end, the spot where that broken bench used to be. It was gone. Replaced. Stronger. Fixed. I sat down anyway. Not because I needed to, but because I could. And for the first time in 20 years, I didn't feel like the kid who had been left behind. I felt like the man who had moved forward. Some lessons break you. Some lessons build you. And some, come back around.